In the middle of a live hearing, Attorney General Merrick Garland slammed the table and loudly accused Jasmine Crockett of being a fake liar, he declared, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "You are a liar to the American people, and I will not sit here and allow that to happen." The room erupted, but Jasmine Crockett, the new congresswoman from Texas, was undeterred. Instead, she coldly pulled out a thick file. Inside it were Garland's handwritten memo, his 23-second Zoom video, and a recording of his real voice ordering the case to be intervened. And within 30 seconds, Washington would be shaken by the shocking evidence that had been revealed, leaving the most powerful man in the Justice Department completely speechless. This was no ordinary hearing. This was the moment a 44-year-old congressman exposed a truth Garland thought would remain buried forever, a truth that could destroy his entire political legacy. To find out what truth Jasmine exposed, watch until the end, because this story is worth every minute of your time. The hearing room was already buzzing before a single question had been asked. Reporters lined the back wall, phones in hand, sending out quick updates that all carried the same warning. Today could end a career. Every seat was filled, every camera light blinking red. The air felt heavy like a storm pressing down, and nobody in that room believed this would be just another hearing. They were waiting for sparks, and the tension was so thick that even the sound of shuffling papers made heads turn. When Merrick Garland entered, he carried himself like the star of the show. His steps were measured, his shoulders back, and a faint smirk tugged at his lips. He nodded once to the committee, slid into his chair, and adjusted the microphone as if he had done it 100 times before. Garland's body language said everything. "I'm in control. I've beaten tougher rooms than this." To the casual observer, it looked like he had already won before the hearing began. But across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, and she wasn't clapping or smiling. She stayed locked in on the thick folder in front of her, flipping through the pages she already knew by heart. She leaned toward her aide, her voice low and steady. "When he looks the most confident, that's when he's about to break." Her aide nodded, but Crockett never looked away from Garland. She wasn't here for a show. She was here for a fight, and deep down, Garland had no idea that the storm he thought he controlled was about to turn against him. Garland leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm authority, and let a stream of legal jargon roll off his tongue. "Representative, these matters fall under prosecutorial discretion. The department regularly engages in reviews, and to imply otherwise would be a mischaracterization of our statutory obligations." His voice was smooth, calculated, and yet the words carried no real answer. The more he spoke, the more it sounded like a wall of empty phrases. Members on the committee shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others scribbling notes. A few even whispered to one another, clearly unimpressed. It was the same performance Garland had given for years. Just technical enough to sound smart, just vague enough to dodge responsibility. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She leaned closer to her microphone, her voice sharper now. "So, you're saying you had no influence?" "None at all. Even when career prosecutors resigned in protest?" Her words landed like a jab, quick and direct. The room grew quiet, everyone sensing that the real fight was beginning. Garland gave a small chuckle, dismissive, and adjusted his glasses. "Representative, you're new to this. You don't understand how these processes work." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Crockett narrowed her eyes, refusing to let him slide past. "With all due respect, Mr. Garland, I understand enough to know that 4 prosecutors don't walk away from a case unless something is very wrong, and I intend to find out what that is." Her words carried across the chamber, and several people in the gallery leaned forward, waiting for his next move. Garland's smirk faltered. For the first time, he seemed irritated. He tapped his pen against the table, a small but telling crack in his composure. Then, in a moment that stunned the room, Garland dropped his mask. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice cutting and accusatory. "Representative Crockett, what you're doing here isn't oversight. It's theater. You are twisting facts, you are misleading the American people, and let me say this plainly, you're lying." The words hit like a bomb. Gasps erupted across the room. Lawmakers on both sides turned to each other in shock, some covering their mouths, others whispering frantically. The chairman slammed his gavel again and again, shouting for order, but the noise only grew. Reporters shot to their feet, phones raised, fingers racing across screens to blast the moment live. The hashtags were already forming in their heads. Hashtag Garland calls Crockett a liar. Through all the chaos, Crockett didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the folder in front of her, her eyes locked on Garland with a stare that could cut steel. Not a word, not a gesture, just silence. But it was a silence filled with power, the kind that made people lean forward, waiting for the strike they knew was coming. Garland had fired his shot. He had called her a liar on national television. What nobody realized yet was that Crockett had been waiting for exactly this moment. And when she finally answered, it wouldn't just be words, it would be evidence sharp enough to pierce through every defense Garland thought he had. The room hadn't recovered from Garland's accusation when Crockett made her move. Slowly, deliberately, she slid a thick folder across the table. She didn't need to shout. The weight of the moment was in her calmness. She turned the cover so the cameras could catch it and spoke clearly. Exhibit J-17. The label was bold, stamped, and unmistakable. Reporters leaned forward in unison, phones raised higher. Crockett opened the file and held up the memo for everyone to see. This is dated January 30th, 2020. It carries your notes, your handwriting, and your signature. Her voice sharpened as she paused, making sure every word landed. In this memo, you wrote, handle stone delicately, reduce exposure, use OAG channel. That's your directive, Mr. Garland. Care to deny it under oath? All eyes shifted. The camera zoomed in tight on the page and then on Garland's face. The transformation was instant. The steady color drained from his cheeks, his lips tightened, and his shoulders shifted as though the chair beneath him had suddenly become uncomfortable. For the first time that morning, the man who walked in with the confidence of someone untouchable looked cornered. He blinked rapidly, glanced toward his attorney, and then back down at the table. His pen stopped moving. That's when one of his Republican allies snapped. "Mr. Chairman," the lawmaker shouted, his voice trembling just enough to betray his panic. "This is a sham, a stunt. That document is fake." His words echoed through the chamber, giving Garland a moment to breathe. The committee erupted into side chatter, with some members nodding in agreement and others rolling their eyes. The noise built into a roar, feeding the illusion that Garland might somehow wriggle free. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned into her mic, her tone sharper now, cutting through the chaos. Fake? This document was obtained through a lawful FOIA request. It was processed, stamped, and authenticated by the department itself. If you doubt it, let's have it verified. Today, right here, on live television. She placed the memo flat on the table and tapped the signature line with her finger. Unless, of course, the Attorney General wants to tell the American people this isn't his handwriting. The room froze. The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Garland's attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but Garland's face gave him away. Tight jaw, narrowed eyes, beads of sweat gathering at his temple. He didn't object. He couldn't. The very silence was damning. From the gallery, a reporter whispered just loud enough for the mics nearby to catch. "If this holds, it's over for him." The words rippled across the room. Everyone knew this wasn't theater anymore. This was evidence, and Crockett had just slammed the first nail into Garland's defense. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With one small gesture to the technician at the back of the room, the lights dimmed slightly and the large screen behind the committee table flickered to life. The chatter in the room stopped instantly, replaced by the hiss of audio warming up. Then the clip began to play. Just 23 seconds long, but enough to suck the oxygen out of the chamber. On screen, Merrick Garland sat in what was clearly a private Zoom call. His face angled to the side, his voice firm and unmistakable. "We need a less visible path. If the guidelines don't fit, make them fit." The words echoed in the silent hearing room. Garland's voice, his own, casually giving directions that confirmed exactly what he had just denied. For a moment, the room was frozen. Nobody breathed. Lawmakers sat with mouths slightly open. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence, and even the chairman's gavel hung motionless in his hand. Then the explosion came. Reporters shouted into phones, "He's on tape!" Others ran toward the doors, desperate to be the first to break the story. The clicking of cameras sounded like gunfire in rapid bursts. Garland's expression, once calm and dismissive, twisted into shock. His lips parted, but no words came out. One Republican member leapt to his feet, his voice cracking under pressure. "This is fake!" "A doctored video. It has to be." His words rang through the chaos, giving Garland a shred of cover to cling to. Heads turned toward Crockett, waiting to see if she could hold the line. She didn't miss a beat. "Fake?" Crockett shot back, her tone cool and sharp. She gestured to the technician again, and the screen filled with raw technical data. This clip's metadata shows it was recorded on February 12, 2020 at 7:43 p.m. Eastern Time. The hash code SHA-256 confirms its integrity. That means the file is authentic, untouched, and verified. And it came directly from a DOJ server log. The lawmaker's face dropped. The cover collapsed. Reporters surged forward again, shouting questions. "Mr. Garland, is that your voice?" "Did you say those words?" The chairman slammed the gavel, demanding order, but the chaos only grew louder. Through it all, Garland sat hunched at the witness table, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the screen, replaying his own words. In that instant, the room understood. This wasn't politics anymore. It was evidence. And Garland's defense had just shattered in front of the entire nation. The hearing room was chaos already, but what came next made it erupt like never before. Garland's lawyer leaned close, one hand covering his mouth, his voice low enough that only Garland was supposed to hear it. "If this goes out, you're done." He thought he was whispering in secret, but the microphone right in front of Garland was still live. The words boomed across the speakers and hit the room like a grenade. For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. Every lawmaker, every reporter, every aide frozen in place. Then the explosion came. Gasps, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people stood to their feet. Reporters frantically typed into their phones. "Garland's lawyer caught on hot mic, admits evidence is fatal." Cameramen swung their lenses toward Garland's table, zooming in on his pale face and his attorney's wide-eyed panic. "Order!" the chairman shouted, pounding his gavel so hard it nearly splintered. But there was no order left to salvage. Lawmakers yelled over each other, some demanding the hearing be suspended, others shouting for Garland to answer immediately. The gallery erupted into a roar, cell phones held high, streaming the moment live. And in the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett stayed perfectly still. She didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply leaned into her microphone, her tone steady but sharp enough to pierce through the chaos. "Mr. Chairman, let the record show, counsel for the Attorney General has just admitted, in his own words, that if this evidence is made public, his client is finished." The room quieted just enough for her words to land. Heads turned back toward Garland. His hands shook slightly as he shuffled his notes, his eyes darting between the folder on the table and the screen still frozen behind him. His lawyer tried to object, waving his arms and insisting the words were taken out of context. But the damage was irreversible. Everyone had heard it. The microphones had betrayed them. "Mr. Garland," one Democratic lawmaker shouted over the din, "if your own lawyer says you're done, what does that tell the American people?" Even some Republicans who moments earlier had tried to shield him shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The protective wall around him was cracking. Crockett, still calm, delivered the final cut of the moment. "You called me a liar, Mr. Garland, but now thanks to your own counsel, this committee and the entire country knows who's really afraid of the truth." The crowd in the gallery broke into loud murmurs, and the cameras caught Garland slumping slightly in his chair, sweat visible at his temple. The hot mic hadn't just exposed his lawyer, it had exposed him, and the look on his face told everyone watching, this wasn't a man in control anymore. This was a man cornered. The room was still reeling from the hot mic disaster when Crockett struck again. She pulled a stack of documents from her folder and spread them out across the table in a neat line, each one marked with bold labels. J17, J22, J28. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking in rapid bursts. "Mr. Chairman," she said firmly, "let's put the pieces together so the American people can see the full picture." She raised the first memo. January 30th, 2020. Garland writes, "Handle stone delicately, reduce exposure, use OAG channel." That's the start. She set it down, then lifted another sheet. February 11th, 2020. An email from the lead prosecutor in the Stone case. "The AG's office has made it clear that the sentencing recommendation must be reduced." This comes directly from the top. Murmurs rippled across the room. Garland shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. Crockett didn't stop. She gestured to the frozen video still on the big screen. February 12th, 2020. On camera, Mr. Garland saying, "If the guidelines don't fit, make them fit." She turned back to the table and placed the final document down like a hammer. February 13th, 2020. 4 career prosecutors resigned from the case in protest. 4. That's not politics. That's integrity walking out the door. The gallery erupted in gasps and whispers. Some lawmakers shook their heads in disbelief. Others sat stone-faced, realizing how bad this looked. Garland's lawyer scribbled furiously on a notepad, sliding it toward him, but Garland barely glanced at it. And then Crockett pulled out one last card. She placed a small recorder on the table, pressed play, and Garland's own voice filled the chamber. "I don't care what the career prosecutors think. This must happen." The words echoed through the speakers, clear and undeniable. The effect was immediate. The chairman's gavel slammed for order. Reporters shouted questions all at once, and the room was on fire. A Republican member leapt up, red-faced, demanding the tape be struck from the record, but the sound was already burned into the minds of everyone present and everyone watching at home. Crockett leaned into her mic, calm as ever. "Mr. Garland, you called me a liar, but what we've just heard is your voice, your words, your orders. So tell us, who's lying to the American people now?" Garland sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. For the first time all morning, he looked less like the Attorney General of the United States and more like a defendant who knew the case was slipping away. The hearing was already at a boiling point when the back door suddenly opened. The creak of the hinges cut through the noise, and every head in the chamber turned. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, clutching a sealed envelope and a sworn affidavit. The room buzzed as whispers rippled from row to row. Reporters recognized him instantly, a former career prosecutor who had resigned during the Stone case. This wasn't rumor anymore. This was flesh and blood testimony walking into the chamber. The chairman quickly raised a hand. "This committee will hear the statement." The witness strode to the front, handed the affidavit to the clerk, and sat at the microphone with a calmness that seemed rehearsed but carried the weight of truth. His voice was steady, measured, and devastating. "I was assigned to the Stone case. Under oath, I can confirm that directives came directly from the Attorney General's office, personally from Merrick Garland, to reduce the sentencing recommendation. It was not a suggestion, it was an order. The impact was immediate. Gasps erupted across the room. Several lawmakers leaned back in their chairs in disbelief. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Phones lit up as reporters hammered out breaking alerts. One muttered into a live mic, "This is it." "This is the collapse." Garland's face told the story. His shoulders dropped, his eyes fell to the desk, and he rubbed his temple with a shaking hand. His pen slipped from his grasp and rolled across the table, unnoticed. The Attorney General of the United States, once untouchable, now looked like a man cornered. His lawyer, realizing the danger, shot up from his chair, voice raised and desperate. "This is outrageous. This witness was not scheduled. This testimony is hearsay. This committee is turning into a circus." He pounded the table, trying to drown out the moment, but his protest only made things worse. Reporters shouted back, "Is this hearsay or is it sworn under oath?" The chairman banged his gavel. "Order! This affidavit is entered into the record." The witness leaned back in his chair, unfazed by the uproar, and delivered the finishing cut. "We were told, word for word, make it fit. Find a way. The Attorney General wants it done." That's why 4 of us resigned, and we documented everything." The words hung in the air like thunder. Garland lowered his head until his forehead nearly touched the paper spread before him. He didn't look up. He couldn't. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, capturing his slumped figure, while Crockett, sitting across the table, never broke eye contact. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply let the silence do the damage. Everyone in the chamber knew it. The surprise witness hadn't just confirmed Crockett's evidence. He had shattered Garland's last defense. The hearing was no longer about politics or rhetoric. It was about truth, delivered under oath, in real time, for the whole nation to see. The chamber was a storm of noise. Lawmakers shouting across the aisle, reporters yelling questions, and the gallery buzzing like a hive that had just been kicked. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, calm but sharp, and locked her eyes on Merrick Garland. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Mr. Garland, just hours ago you sat there and called me a liar. You tried to humiliate me, to paint me as reckless. But now the entire country has seen it for themselves. Who is really betraying their oath to the law?" The room fell into a tense hush. Garland didn't raise his head. His shoulders hunched as if the weight of the documents, the video, the hot mic, and now the sworn witness were all pressing down at once. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, whispering frantically, but Garland's face was frozen, drained of color, his lips moving with no sound. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, capturing every detail. The sweat at his temple, the trembling hands, the hollow eyes of a man cornered. The chairman slammed his gavel so hard the wood cracked. "This hearing is suspended. All exhibits, testimony, and recordings will be transferred immediately to an independent forensic review." His words struck like a verdict. Reporters shouted into phones, "Committee halts hearing, turns over evidence for outside investigation." The nation was already watching, and now it had its headline. 2 security officers stepped forward, positioning themselves near Garland. He tried to gather his papers, but his lawyer snatched them instead, stuffing them hastily into a briefcase. Garland rose slowly, his legs unsteady, and for a moment he seemed lost. No longer the man who entered the room with a smirk, but a shell of himself. The officers guided him toward the side exit as cameras flashed like lightning. The image of the Attorney General being escorted out, head down, was burned into history in real time. Meanwhile, Crockett gathered her folders with deliberate care. No rushing, no theatrics, just the calm of someone who knew she had delivered the truth. She closed the final binder, stood, and faced the cameras head-on. "Americans don't need blind faith," she said, her voice steady but resonant. "They need evidence. And today, they got it." The words landed like a closing gavel of her own. The gallery erupted in murmurs, some gasping, others clapping, despite the chairman's calls for order. Reporters shouted questions. "Representative Crockett, what's next? Do you expect charges?" But she didn't stop to answer. She turned, walked out with her staff at her side, leaving behind the shattered remains of Garland's defense. It wasn't just the end of a hearing. It was the image of power collapsing in real time, and the rise of a freshman lawmaker who had just proven that truth, when armed with evidence, could bring even the most untouchable to their knees. It didn't take long for the storm inside the hearing room to spill across the entire country. Within 6 minutes, Twitter, Facebook, and every other platform were dominated by 2 hashtags, #GarlandHotMic and #CrockettReceipts. Millions of users replayed the moment the lawyer's whisper blasted across the speakers, pairing it with Crockett's stone-cold response. Memes spread like wildfire, one showing Garland's pale face with the caption, "When your own mic betrays you." Another had Crockett holding up Exhibit J17 with the tagline, "Receipts don't lie." News networks reacted instantly. CNN and MSNBC cut their regular programming mid-sentence to run the hot mic clip on repeat. Even Fox News, usually cautious in handling stories damaging to an attorney general, couldn't avoid it. They looped the video with commentators stumbling over words like unprecedented and potential perjury. Anchors struggled to keep up as producers whispered updates into their earpieces. Lower thirds on every screen blared the same message. Breaking, Garland lawyer caught on hot mic, fallout explodes. Back in Congress, the divide was immediate and brutal. A few Republicans quietly slipped out of the chamber, their faces grim, avoiding cameras as they headed for side exits. Others huddled together, whispering fiercely, unsure whether to defend Garland or cut him loose. On the Democratic side, there was shock mixed with satisfaction. Several lawmakers exchanged wide-eyed glances as if to say, "Did that really just happen?" No one dared to cheer openly, but the energy in the air said enough. They knew Crockett had landed a political knockout. International media joined the frenzy. The BBC called it the most dramatic congressional hearing of the decade. Le Monde in France ran the headline, "A hot mic heard around the world." German outlets referred to it as the trial without a courtroom, and a Japanese broadcaster labeled it simply the hearing of the century. Around the globe, it wasn't just politics. It was a spectacle of accountability unfolding live, and America's allies and rivals alike were watching closely. The fallout wasn't measured in hours or days. It was happening in real time, every second, every replay, every headline dragging Garland deeper into crisis while lifting Crockett into the national spotlight. In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett's name was everywhere. Headlines called her the woman with the folder who brought down the Attorney General. Talk shows replayed her calm stare and her final words on loop, holding her up as a new kind of politician. One who didn't just talk about accountability, but forced it into the open. For young women, especially women of color, Crockett became a symbol of courage under fire, proof that preparation and evidence could knock down even the most powerful. For Merrick Garland, the legacy was the opposite. His once-iron reputation crumbled overnight. Commentators who had praised his composure now pointed to his pale face, his slumped shoulders, and that devastating hot mic moment as the textbook image of power collapsing. He became a living cautionary tale, the embodiment of what happens when arrogance collides with undeniable evidence. Where he once represented stability and control, now he was remembered as the man who underestimated a freshman congresswoman and paid the price in front of the entire world. And the message that rang out far beyond Washington was simple, but unforgettable. The truth doesn't beg, it demands, and when it speaks, no one escapes. That phrase, quoted in headlines and echoed across social media, turned into both a warning and a rallying cry. For politicians, it was a reminder that no amount of status or influence could shield them from the power of documented truth. For the public, it was proof that even the most untouchable could be held to account. Crockett's showdown with Garland wasn't just another hearing, it became a turning point, a reminder that democracy survives only when the truth is fearless and those who carry it refuse to be silenced. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories. Your support helps us keep creating. This story is 100% fictional. It is not real and has been created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or situations is purely coincidental. Characters mentioned in this story, including Jasmine Crockett and Merrick Garland, are not meant to represent actual individuals. Any overlap in names with real public figures is accidental and should not be taken as fact.